Farage mania, nothing we did. I could have written the script. I could have cast that scene almost of what happened when he arrived in what he wants to call home in the next few weeks. What did you make of that?
Oh, well, I thought these were some of the defining images of the election thus far. This was Nigel out there in Clacton enlivening a pretty staid contest between two not particularly radical leaders. And this was all about him, bit of mischief, bit of mayhem, lots of bombast, lots of promises. We'll see what happens. But I think, a really big reception, a couple of hundred people, it seemed from the footage. And that sets him up nicely for 4 weeks' time with the Clacton verdict on a knife edge.
Yeah, you don't get that when Laura Trott turns up in Sevenoaks Town Centre, I can tell you that much. But there's a few stragglers at the back, and I'm usually one of them, but that's another story. But yes, there is a Farage thing, isn't there? There's something, every now and again a politician comes along. I mean, in fairness, Corbyn had a bit of that with his own flock. They liked him. They would turn up in large numbers. I can remember in 2019, people posting images of Corbyn at rallies and turning up at events in his local area and beyond, and people saying, look at this, the Tories don't get this kind of response. So it does happen with a certain type of politico.
Yes, and I think that change is very much the theme in this election. If you look at polling, around 2/3, 70% of the public have seen they want change. And therefore, it's about who is the best vehicle to deliver that. Now, last time, I think, after the mess of the Brexit years, they wanted someone to get through all that with Boris Johnson. He harnessed the sort of change maker energy as someone who's going to knock down the status quo. 5 years on, obviously, the Tories are a tainted brand. So it's going to be Nigel Farage who is going to be trying to encapsulate on the right. And I spoke to him last night and he said, if you look up the definition of revolt in the dictionary, that's what he's trying to do. People's revolt, and certainly on the rise of British politics.
So how well can he do here? Because I was been looking, like yourself, bit of a political anorak in addition to doing this for a living. And I was looking at all the numbers. You go down a rabbit hole when you do this as well, don't you? You find yourself checking out other constituencies, and then you'd see names that you'd forgotten about, and then you wonder where they've gone, and before you know it, 3 hours have passed. But hey, that's the modern world we live in. Giles Watling, current Conservative MP for Clacton, 72.3% of the vote in 2019, almost a breathtaking result, unheard of in terms of the amount that he polled there. Labour 15.5%, getting nowhere at all. So Mr Watling, up until yesterday, was almost guaranteed to find himself back as the MP for Clacton. Now Mr Farage comes along. Now, that is such a big majority. Can even Nigel Farage overturn that?
I reckon he can. And I think that there's two reasons for that. Number one, of course, I think that, the fact the size of the majority ought to give some caution to Mr Watling, which is that, that was purely inflated because of the Brexit election. This was such a Brexity area. That's itself is a warning sign. Of course, it was the only seat that UKIP ever won at the general election in 2015. The second reason is polling, which showed in January that Nigel Farage would win by 10 points if he stood there in Clacton. He clearly had a kind of resonance, particularly among those type of voters. Across the nation, I think that Reform will struggle to get more than 20% in anything more than a handful of seats, actually. But if you look at the polling out today, but I think that actually, if you look at Farage, they could win Clacton. So I think that they could get 1 or 2 seats in the Commons.
Obviously, the smaller parties do suffer from the first past the post system. I get that. You go back to 2015, as you rightly said, Douglas Carswell, although a very popular local MP in that area as a Conservative, it's maybe not the best example of UKIP penetrating a new audience, but nonetheless, a win is a win. He came back as a UKIP candidate, but on that election, of course, 2015, UKIP got 4 million votes. They couldn't transfer it to Westminster's success. The smart money says Reform will do even better than that, but can any of it really turn into green bench success for Westminster?
It's really difficult because under first past the post, concentration is representation. You need to have, a large number of votes in a small number of areas to get results. And that's what we've seen with the Greens and the Liberal Democrats. I mean, the irony is that Reform will probably poll more votes than the Liberal Democrats and yet win less seats than them, if indeed at all. I think the key thing they need to make this election about is a sort of consequence-free hit. The times that UKIP and then the Brexit Party did very well in the European elections, 2014 and 2019, it was both times. It was a lot of Tories going, well, there's nothing at stake here. I may as well go and vote for them. And so I think that's what they're trying to do and saying, hey, the Tories don't stand for something, come and vote for us. And I think a weakened Tory party and a kind of strengthened Reform party in 6 weeks' time, very interesting questions for the kind of right of British politics, what's going on.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, we look at what's happening in the Labour Party. They seem to be having a pretty good campaign at the moment. I've just noticed as well that Faiza Shaheen, who of course was dropped from being a candidate in East London in Chingford, has now resigned from the Labour Party as well. I can't imagine Keir Starmer crying in the corner over this one. I mean, he looks as if he's going to be in Downing Street with a 200-seat majority. He's not going to be bothered by that, is he?
No, I don't think so. And I think that Faiza Shaheen would have had the potential to become a real thorn in his side if she was in Parliament for the next 5 years. Now he doesn't have that problem. And, I think that that's the calculation they're choosing to make, is pushing out for you on the left in order to make gains on the right.
What I still can't get my head around on this, James, is that, up until what seems, as I always seem to say, about half an hour ago, it was impossible for Labour to overturn the 2019 Tory majority, which was, convincing 80-odd seat majority. Boris Johnson. Scotland was going to be the big sticking point, if nothing else. Now, that has all changed because of what happened with the SM, and you couldn't write this stuff really, so that's given a way in for Labour. But even so, mathematically, the swing has got to be so big, even for Labour to get a majority of one. So to get a majority of 200, we are looking at something that has never happened in our political history before.
Yes, looking in the post-war era, there's only one time when a majority government of one party has switched to another majority government of another party. It typically takes two or three, heaves. You think it's the minority government, 2010 it was the coalition, for instance. What we are seeing is an age of increased political volatility, where you're up one minute, down the next, trends sweeping away old parties, establishment's gone. And I think that's what's the telling of the post-Brexit era of 2016. And Nigel Farage is very well placed to exploit that. And the person who benefits most from this is Keir Starmer. 5 years ago, you were talking about 10 years in opposition, and now he's got a magic lamp, and he's certainly getting a lot of wishes out of it.
Yeah. But what, again, just to compound how remarkable all of this is, and I think this is fair to say, that this doesn't seem to be down to sort of Starmer's brilliance, this amazing philosophical new kid on the block that suddenly pitched up to almost Blair Mark II with booster rockets attached, where everybody around the nation was going, man, this guy is fantastic. Look at what he's promised. Look at what he's doing. There's none of that going on, and yet he's still going to be the chief beneficiary of this incredible result.
Yeah, I agree. I think that most Tory MPs would say they're the ones who threw it all away. And, if you look at the kind of last 5 years, partly through events outside of their control, like the pandemic, partly because of inflation, but we're going to end up with a parliament where the living standards were lower than 5 years ago. And so I think any government would struggle to get re-elected on that. On Keir Starmer, he's done the basics well. He's purged the left. He's kind of made the Labour fit to be in government again. But I agree in that there's not kind of any kind of great hope and expectation. And that's why I think turnout's going to be low. And I think that the next government, it may be riding high right now, but things could turn very quickly south in 2 years' time.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating watching this TV debate this evening. Popcorn at the ready, or not maybe, because after all, we're talking about Rishi Sunak versus Keir Starmer. I mean, this is not, the greatest political tete-a-tete I think we've ever seen in life. It's not Kennedy-Nixon or anything like that. But nonetheless, they will go head-to-head. I was looking at this story of a cap on immigration, on visas, but they won't be drawn, the Tories won't be drawn on numbers at the weekend. Yvette Cooper said Labour won't be drawn on numbers. So, I mean, it looks pretty darn similar to me in terms of that particular policy.
Yeah, I think that basically immigration is going to be a score draw on this one, in that the Tories traditionally had a strength on it. But because we've seen such huge numbers, 685,000 most recently, 758,000 the year before that, it means that they can't really talk a good game on legal migration. As for Labour, it's just about navigating the pitfalls for them. I think that if you look at the kind of incentives and structures in the Labour Party, they've got the three biggest unions all want to be pushing for more care visas. You've got, after the election, they'll probably represent every Russell Group university in England. The influences within Labour are much more public sector, much more kind of pushing for more people coming on legal visas. So I think basically Labour will just draw on that one and then take the fight Tories on other things like the NHS.
Yeah, I was listening to a rather sneering interview this morning I'm sure you heard it as well, on the BBC On the Today programme, where Mr Farage was being interviewed on caps and numbers and what are vital services, etc. And it was very, I understand why the BBC need to ask the question. It was the incredulity with which the presenter was sort of, just couldn't get her head around the idea that these might be areas of concern to people. It sounded to me. And of course, Nigel Farage is looking for a zero number on this immigration issue. But they would be up against it, wouldn't they? If Reform somehow miraculously became the government tomorrow, they would find themselves, as all politicians do, they have their big wish list of, if I was Prime Minister, I would do this. And then you get the big job, you're taken into a room by a bunch of civil servants and go, here's what you need to know. Here's the reality. We ain't got no care workers. We're short of doctors. We're short of nurses. We need butchers. We need bakers. We've got, even candlestick makers are on the shortened list as well. So you need these people. And that is going to be the brutal reality, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's about the lens with which you view a 5-year parliament. I mean, this is the big split on the right now between those who just kind of think that immigration is broadly good. They kind of want it to help GDP, but they think there's about control. And others who think this ought to be a fundamental reworking of the British economy, much more kind of education of people and sort of retraining and stuff like that. The key thing is what you can achieve in 5 years. And I think that it's all very well to say things from outside, but inside you're subject to certain pressures. And Reform would basically have to say to certain sectors or certain businesses, you're going to go to the wall on this one, because I can't see in the kind of short to medium term how you turn them around. So it's a very big off, but then also, this is democracy, and basically it's a message that has a lot of resonance. And as Danny Kruger himself was recorded as saying today, the Conservatives are still on successive manifestos to bring down migration. They just haven't done so since 2010.
Could this election campaign get dirty, James? Because I can't see any other way that some people are going to do well out of this. I mean, the Conservatives, unless they find some absolute horrendous muck on Keir Starmer or Nigel Farage, I don't know what else could turn their fortunes around. We know pretty much what they stand for, and what they stand for has not been good enough for the electorate at the moment. Looking at the polls, it's not good enough. There are some diehards that will always vote blue, of course. But what could happen to turn this around for the Conservatives?
I think it would have to be about Labour mistakes on an epic scale. And I think coming to light certain information, perhaps, which we aren't previously aware, I'd struggle to see. I mean, I remember, I think, coming on talk about a year ago and saying that even if Rishi Sunak retook the Falklands and discovered North Sea oil again off the North Sea, I mean, he would struggle to win this election. I think that's true. I think there will be some dirty fighting. Labour have tried a bit of that with tax on Rishi Sunak's record as a banker. Conservatives have criticised him for his record as Director of Public Prosecutions. But that said, I just think what's looking at the polls is that, so little is cutting through. The noise has all been noise basically the past year. Actually, focus groups show that a lot of voters are turned off and made up their minds.
And it's the little stuff that isn't really going to bother either leader very much. I mentioned the fact that the former Chingford candidate has lost her job. She's now resigned from Labour. Another story from Labour, Angela Rayner saying she wants to rid the world of nuclear weapons. Very much sort of echoes of where Corbyn might be. But that may well cause Keir Starmer a problem going forward. But I mean, at the moment, he can't fire her, of course, because he didn't appoint her. But that's not going to cause a big problem in the grander scale of Mr. Starmer's campaign.
No, and I think that the media now is all on the narrative of, Tory splits, Tory divided, Tories are going to lose, etc. And it's just difficult to kind of overturn that. And also, frankly, we've seen the last 5 years, was it 3 different prime ministers? It's all been very, very messy, very, very public right now. So I think people on the opposition aren't really so much paying, attention to these kind of minor differences on policy.
Indeed. Listen, James, it's always great to gauge your view. Thank you. We will speak again, of course.